During my son's wedding reception, his new bride looked me up and down with absolute disgust and hissed, "Get out of here and do not come back because you are not welcome here." I just smiled, buttoned my faded suit jacket and replied, "Okay, but I will take some others with me." When she realized exactly who was walking out the door behind me, her smug smile melted into a scream of pure panic. Before I tell you how a father's silent sacrifice turned into the perfect revenge, let me know in the comments where you are watching this from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect cannot be bought, but only earned. My name is Howard Bennett. I am 72 years old, and for the past 3 decades, I believed I was raising a son who understood the value of a hard day's work. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Ohio, my late wife Martha and I built our lives on the simple principle that you do not spend what you do not have, and you never look down on the people who sweep the floors. When Martha passed away 10 years ago, Justin became my entire world. I made sure he went to the best schools, had the best opportunities, and never had to worry about the financial struggles his mother and I faced early on. But sitting in the corner of the extravagant dining room at the Oak Ridge Country Club for his wedding rehearsal dinner, I realized I had not raised a man. I had funded a monster. The room was dripping with wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over tables adorned with imported orchids. I sat quietly at a table near the back, wearing the same charcoal gray suit I had worn to Martha's funeral. It was clean and pressed, but undeniably dated. Across the room, Justin sat beside his bride, Vanessa. She was 30 years old, with a sharp, calculating beauty and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was holding court with her bridesmaids, and her voice carried perfectly over the soft jazz playing in the background. "I cannot believe he actually parked that rusted 10-year-old truck in the valet line." Vanessa laughed, taking a sip of her expensive champagne. "It is like having a janitor crash a gala. I told Justin his father needs to be kept out of sight tomorrow. I am not having that shabby aesthetic ruining the aesthetic of my wedding photos." The bridesmaids giggled. I sat there, my hands resting on the crisp white tablecloth, feeling a cold knot form in my chest. I looked at Justin, my own flesh and blood. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the boy I had stayed up with when he had a fever. He was sitting right next to her holding his glass of wine. He heard every word, and he said absolutely nothing. He just offered a weak, uncomfortable chuckle and looked away. That silence was a betrayal deeper than any insult Vanessa could have thrown. What Vanessa did not know, and what Justin had deliberately hidden from her, was the reality of how this lavish weekend was even possible. 2 months prior, Justin had come to my house practically in tears, claiming his investments had tanked, and he could not afford the wedding. To save his pride, I quietly wired $80,000 to cover the venue, the catering, the flowers, and the open bar. Justin told Vanessa and her snobby parents that he had paid for it all himself from a massive cryptocurrency windfall. I let him have the glory because I loved him. I thought I was protecting his dignity. Instead, I had merely purchased a front-row seat to my own humiliation. After the dinner concluded, Justin caught my eye and gestured for me to follow him into the quiet, mahogany-paneled hallway outside the banquet room. For a brief, foolish moment, my heart lifted. I thought he was going to apologize. I thought he was going to pull me aside to thank me privately for the $80,000 and say he was sorry about Vanessa's cruel jokes. "Dad, listen," Justin said, pacing nervously on the thick carpet. "We have a bit of a situation." Vanessa was looking at our honeymoon itinerary, and the standard over-water bungalow in Bora Bora just is not going to cut it. Her friends are all staying at the premium resort on the other side of the island. I need you to wire me another $15,000 by tomorrow morning so I can secure the upgrade. I stared at him, trying to find a trace of the son I raised in his greedy, frantic eyes. "You are asking me for another $15,000, I asked, my voice low and steady. "After I just paid $80,000 for a wedding, you are claiming you paid for." Justin sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Come on, Dad. You live in a tiny house and drive a truck that belongs in a scrapyard. You do not even spend your money. What are you hoarding it for? This is my wedding. It is the most important week of my life. I am not giving you another dime, Justin, I said firmly. You need to learn to live within your means. His face hardened. The panic vanished, replaced by a chilling entitlement. You know, Vanessa warned me about this, he muttered, his tone turning nasty. She said your cognitive decline was making you paranoid and stingy. Keep your money, old man. But do not expect us to come around playing happy family when you are rotting away in that cheap house of yours. He turned on his heel and walked back into the party, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. The words cognitive decline echoed in my ears. He was already laying the groundwork to explain away my refusal to be his endless ATM. I needed air. I could not go back into that dining room and look at those people. I turned and pushed through the heavy leather doors that led to the venue kitchens. As the doors swung shut behind me, the elegant jazz music was replaced by the chaotic, beautiful symphony of a commercial kitchen. Searing pans, shouting line cooks, and the clatter of silverware. The moment I stepped inside, the chaos abruptly paused. The executive chef, a towering man named David, immediately wiped his hands on his apron and rushed over. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice filled with absolute reverence. "What an honor, sir. Is the food to your liking? Do you need a private table set up in the back?" I smiled warmly at David. "The food is spectacular as always, David. Just needed a quiet place to catch my breath." "Carry on, everyone." The kitchen staff nodded respectfully and went back to work. This was the second secret Justin did not know. When Martha and I started out, we opened a tiny diner. Over 40 years of relentless work, smart investments, and frugal living, that diner grew. Today, my private holding company owns an entire empire of hospitality and real estate across the state. I do not just patronize the Oak Ridge Country Club. My holding company owns the entire catering and hospitality group staffing it. I employ every chef, every waiter, and every manager in this building. I choose to wear flannel and drive an old truck because I never forgot where I came from. Wealth is quiet, but poor people with money are loud. While I stood in the corner of the kitchen sipping a glass of water, the swinging doors burst open. Vanessa stormed in, her face flushed with fury, holding a crystal wine glass. She marched right up to a young, terrified waitress who looked barely out of high school. "Are you completely incompetent?" Vanessa screamed, her voice echoing off the stainless steel walls. "I asked for a dry Pinot Grigio and you brought me a Chardonnay. Do you have any idea how much my husband is paying you people to be here? You are completely useless." The young girl had tears in her eyes, stammering an apology, but Vanessa simply shoved the glass into the girl's chest, spilling wine all over her uniform, and stormed out. David, the chef, looked at me, his face pale, knowing full well I had witnessed the entire exchange. I did not yell. I did not make a scene. I just patted David on the shoulder and walked out the back door into the cool night air. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. I was not just dealing with an ungrateful son. I was dealing with a pair of toxic parasites who believed my money gave them the right to abuse working-class people. The next morning was the wedding day. The air was thick with nervous energy and the smell of expensive floral arrangements. I arrived at the venue early and waited quietly in the grand lobby outside the bridal suite. The doors opened, and Vanessa walked out, complaining loudly into her phone about the makeup artist. When she saw me sitting there, her face contorted into a mask of pure irritation. She hung up the phone and marched over to me, her silk robe trailing behind her. "Howard, we need to get one thing straight before the ceremony starts," she said, crossing her arms. "I have spoken to the photographer and the wedding planner. You are going to sit in the 4th row during the ceremony, not the front." I looked up at her calmly. "The father of the groom usually sits in the front row, Vanessa. Not when he refuses to dress the part," she snapped. "Justin told me you refuse to help us with the honeymoon. If you are going to be a cheap, stubborn old man, you can sit in the back with the distant relatives. I will not have your shabby aesthetic ruining the front row of my photographs. Do you understand me?" I looked at this woman, the woman who was about to marry my son, and I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thick, pristine white envelope. I held it out to her. Vanessa saw the envelope, and her eyes instantly lit up with naked greed. She assumed it was the $15,000 Justin had demanded the night before. She snatched it from my hand, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "I am glad you finally came to your senses, Howard," she said, tapping the envelope against her palm. "Sit in the 4th row. Keep your mouth shut and try not to embarrass us." I nodded slowly, standing up from the chair. "Enjoy your wedding, Vanessa." I turned and walked toward the banquet hall. She did not know it yet, but she had not just taken an envelope of cash. Inside that envelope was a voided check and a handwritten note that would serve as the first domino in her complete and utter ruin. The trap was set, and all I had to do now was wait for the reception. The grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club was a spectacle of excessive spending. Crystal glasses clinked over the booming bass of a 10-piece live band playing songs I did not recognize. Towers of white roses sat on every table, reaching so high the guests had to lean around them just to speak to one another. I was seated at table 14, exactly where Vanessa had ordered me to be. It was tucked in the far back corner, right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter pushed through the doors, a blast of hot air and the smell of roasted meat washed over my table. The other guests at table 14 were distant relatives of Vanessa's parents, who spent the entire evening complaining about the humidity and completely ignoring my presence. That suited me just fine. I sat in my faded charcoal suit, sipping a glass of iced water and observing the room. I watched Justin laughing loudly with his groomsmen, holding a glass of scotch that cost more than my first car. He looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, but there was a frantic energy about him. He was performing wealth, playing the part of a self-made millionaire for a room full of people who only cared about his wallet. I knew the truth. I knew his bank accounts were empty. I knew he was drowning in debt. And I knew my silent sacrifice was the only reason he was not entirely ruined. But I kept my silence. I just watched the waiters moving seamlessly through the crowd. Every time one of them passed my table, they gave me a subtle, respectful nod. They knew exactly who owned the company that signed their paychecks. The music slowed down, transitioning into a soft, romantic ballad. Couples moved toward the dance floor. I took a bite of my steak, cutting it slowly when I saw her. Vanessa was weaving through the crowded tables, her massive white gown brushing against the chairs. She was clutching the white envelope I had given her that morning in her right hand. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. She was smiling at the guests as she passed them, nodding gracefully and playing the perfect glowing bride. But as she got closer to table 14, her eyes locked onto mine, and that fake smile vanished. Her gaze was pure venom. She moved with purpose, ignoring the distant relatives at my table who had suddenly stopped talking. She leaned over my shoulder, bringing her face close to my ear, so no one else could hear her over the music. The sweet smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "What kind of sick joke is this?" she hissed, her voice a harsh whisper that cut through the music. She slammed the envelope onto the table right next to my water glass. The flap was torn open. Poking out of the top was the voided check I had placed inside, along with the handwritten note that simply read, "Respect is earned, not bought." She leaned closer, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the white tablecloth. "You think you are so clever, Howard," she spat. "You think this makes a point. Justin told me you were holding out on the honeymoon money because your mind was going, but this is not dementia. This is just pathetic. You are a cheap, bitter old man who cannot stand to see his son happy." I looked down at the voided check and then back up at her face. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I took the cloth napkin from my lap and gently wiped my mouth. "Vanessa, you have a very expensive party happening around you," I said calmly. "A party you did not pay for. I suggest you go enjoy it." My calmness only seemed to fuel her rage. Her face turned a deep shade of red beneath her heavy makeup. "Do not speak to me like I am one of your uneducated truck-driving friends," she sneered. "You have been an embarrassment since the moment you walked into this country club. Look at you. You look like a janitor who wandered in off the street. You are ruining my wedding with your cheap suit and your miserable attitude. Justin is ashamed of you, and honestly, I do not blame him. He told me he hates bringing you around my parents because you have absolutely no class. Those words were meant to hurt me. She wanted to see me break. She wanted to see the pain on my face of a father realizing his son was ashamed of him. But the pain had already passed the night before. Now there was only the cold, hard reality of consequence. I am sure Justin has said many things, Vanessa, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. But class is not about the clothes you wear or the car you drive. Class is about how you treat people when you think you have all the power. And you have shown me exactly who you are. She let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Who I am? I am the woman who is taking your son far away from your pathetic little life. We do not need your upgrade money for the honeymoon. Justin has plenty of cash from his investments. We do not need you at all, Howard. The only reason you are even at this table is because I pitied you. I wanted to give you a chance to prove you could belong in our world, but you proved exactly the opposite. You are just a stingy old fool who thinks a piece of paper makes him powerful. I looked across the room. Justin was watching us from the bar. He saw his new wife leaning over my table looking furious. He saw me sitting there taking the abuse. And just like the night before, he turned his back and pretended not to see. He took another sip of his expensive scotch and laughed at a joke someone told him. He was making his choice in real time. I turned my attention back to the bride. Her breathing was heavy, and her eyes were burning with a hatred that felt almost suffocating. You are right about one thing, Vanessa, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, steady hum. This voided check does not make me powerful. It was simply a test to see if you valued family over a fancy vacation, a test to see if my son would defend his father. You both failed. She stood up straight, adjusting the bodice of her expensive white gown. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. I am done playing games with you, Howard, she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. You have embarrassed Justin for the last time. I glanced past her toward the bar. Justin was still there. He had turned his back to us, completely engaged in a conversation with a groomsman. He was actively choosing to let his new wife humiliate his father in a room full of strangers. He had sold out his own flesh and blood for the illusion of status. The boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, was gone. The man standing at the bar was a stranger to me. I felt a profound sense of mourning wash over me, not for the son I was losing today, but for the son I had lost a long time ago without even realizing it. Vanessa noticed me looking at Justin and let out a soft, cruel laugh. Do not bother looking at him, Howard. He is not going to save you. He does not care about you. Do you want to know what he said to me last night after you refused to pay for our honeymoon upgrade? He said he cannot wait until you finally pass away so we can sell that pathetic little house of yours and use the money for something that actually matters. He is just waiting for his inheritance. You are nothing to him but a waiting game. The sheer brutality of her words hung in the air between us. She delivered them with a triumphant smile, believing she had just delivered the fatal blow to my spirit. She wanted to see me crumble. She wanted to see me weep. But the truth is, her words were incredibly liberating. Any lingering guilt I felt about what I was about to do evaporated completely. They had dug their own grave with their boundless greed and absolute lack of humanity. I owed them nothing. I owed them no loyalty, no protection, and certainly no more of my hard-earned money. You are incredibly confident, Vanessa, I said, my voice low and steady. You stand here in this beautiful ballroom, drinking imported champagne, eating premium steak, and you believe you have conquered the world. You look around at these crystal chandeliers and these tuxedo-clad waiters, and you think this luxury belongs to you. You think you have elevated yourself above people like me. She stood up straight, her eyes flashing with arrogant pride. I do not just think it, Howard. I know it. Look around you. This is my world now. This is the standard of living I deserve. Justin and I belong in places like the Oak Ridge Country Club. We belong among the elite, and you belong in that rusted-out truck parked out back. You are a relic, Howard. You are a reminder of a past Justin is trying so desperately to escape. I slowly took a sip of my iced water, savoring the profound irony of her monologue. She was bragging about her place among the elite, while standing in a building owned entirely by the very man she was insulting. Every waiter serving her, every chef preparing her food, every manager ensuring her night was flawless, reported ultimately to me. The very ground she was standing on belonged to my holding company. She was a guest in my house, mocking me for not belonging. I am done wasting my breath on you, she continued, her tone growing increasingly hostile. I have a wedding to enjoy. I have hundreds of important guests to entertain. People who actually matter. People who are not going to drag down my social standing by association. She took a step back, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. I am going to make this very simple for you, Howard. You are going to leave. You are going to stand up, walk out those doors, and get into your miserable little truck and drive back to whatever sad, lonely life you came from. You are not going to eat the food here. You are not going to drink the wine. And you are certainly not going to be in any of our family portraits. I placed my water glass down on the table. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. The distant relatives at my table were now staring openly, unable to pretend they were not listening to the bride's furious demands. Are you telling me to leave my son's wedding, Vanessa? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any anger. I am not telling you, I am ordering you, she snapped, her voice rising just enough to turn a few more heads in our direction. You are a toxic, embarrassing presence, and I will not allow you to ruin my night any longer. You are cut off, Howard. From us, from our future children, from everything. She pointed dramatically toward the heavy oak doors at the front of the banquet hall. Get out of here and do not come back, because you are not welcome here, she snarled. The music from the band seemed to fade into the background as those words settled over the table. Get out of here. You are not welcome here. It was the ultimate rejection delivered with maximum cruelty. She stood there, her chest heaving, waiting for my reaction. She expected me to argue. She expected me to plead. Perhaps she expected me to cause a scene so she could have security escort me out and play the victim for her wealthy friends. Instead, I did the exact opposite. I placed my cloth napkin neatly on the table beside my untouched plate. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air of the air-conditioned ballroom fill my lungs. I placed my hands on the armrests of my chair and slowly, deliberately pushed myself up to a standing position. I was taller than Vanessa, and as I stood to my full height, she instinctively took a half step back, though she tried to maintain her aggressive posture. I looked down at her. I did not glare. I did not frown. I simply looked at her with a gentle, knowing smile. It was the smile of a man who held every single card in the deck, while his opponent proudly displayed a losing hand. I reached down and calmly buttoned the center button of my faded charcoal suit jacket. I smoothed out the lapels, brushing away an imaginary speck of dust. I felt completely, entirely free. The heavy burden of trying to buy my son's love had been lifted from my shoulders. The obligation to protect him from the consequences of his own arrogance was gone. You are right, Vanessa, I said, my voice carrying a warm, almost grandfatherly tone. I truly do not belong here at this table. Her smug, triumphant smile returned in full force. She crossed her arms, believing she had won the ultimate victory. She believed she had successfully banished the embarrassing father-in-law and secured her place in high society. I am glad you finally understand, she whispered viciously. Now leave. I gave her one last pleasant nod. Okay, I replied softly, but I will take some others with me. I turned my back on her bewildered face and began to walk. Not toward the front exit where she had pointed, but directly toward the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen. The real wedding reception was about to begin, and I was the one directing the music. I turned my back on Vanessa and took a slow, deliberate breath. The heavy bass of the wedding band vibrated through the hardwood floor beneath my worn leather shoes. Guests were laughing and clinking their expensive champagne glasses, completely oblivious to the quiet revolution about to unfold. Vanessa stood behind me, radiating a smug satisfaction. She honestly believed she had just won a grand victory by banishing a tired old man from her perfect society event. She thought I was retreating to the parking lot to hide in my rusted truck and lick my wounds. I could almost feel her triumphant sneer burning into the back of my neck. But I did not walk toward the main lobby doors. Instead, I walked directly toward the polished mahogany doors of the catering kitchen. The contrast between the extravagant ballroom and the operational hub of the country club was always fascinating to me. I pushed open the swinging doors and stepped into the bright fluorescent light of the kitchen. The heat of the commercial ovens and the rich smell of roasted garlic greeted me. Dozens of chefs, line cooks, and servers were moving in a highly orchestrated dance of culinary perfection. They were plating the secondary courses and preparing the dessert tiers. Standing near the central prep station was Richard, the general manager of the venue. Richard had worked for my holding company for nearly 15 years. He was a meticulous professional who knew every intricate detail of my corporate operations. Richard saw me enter and immediately wiped his hands on a clean towel, stepping away from the chaotic prep line. He approached me with a look of deep concern, likely noting the rigid posture I held. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Is everything all right out there in the dining room? Do you need a private space?" I shook my head slowly, looking him directly in the eyes. "Richard," I said, my voice perfectly calm, but carrying a weight that made him stand at strict attention. "The groom and his bride have just informed me that I am no longer welcome at this establishment. They have ordered me to leave the premises immediately." Richard blinked, his professional composure slipping for a fraction of a second. He looked toward the swinging doors and then back to me, completely bewildered. "Sir," he stammered, "this is your building. Your company owns the entire hospitality group. You employ every single person in this room. They cannot possibly ask you to leave." I offered a small, sad smile. "They are unaware of that fact, Richard, and I intend to comply with the bride's vicious demand to the absolute letter. I am leaving right now. But as the sole owner of this operation, I am implementing an immediate and total cessation of all services for this specific event." Richard did not hesitate. He did not ask for clarification or question the financial impact. He simply straightened his tie and nodded with absolute loyalty. "Understood, Mr. Bennett. What are your exact orders?" I looked around the bustling kitchen at the hardworking people who relied on my business to feed their own families. "I will ensure every staff member is paid their full wages for the entire weekend," I told him. "No one loses a single dime over my family dispute. But I want this entire venue shut down immediately. Stop the music. Stop the food. Pack up the bars. We are walking out." Richard nodded once more. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his two-way radio, pressing the transmission button. All staff, he spoke clearly into the microphone. "This is Richard. Code Black on the wedding reception. Cease all operations immediately. Put down your trays. Step away from the stations. We are evacuating the floor." I pushed back through the kitchen doors and stepped into the ballroom one last time. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, waiting. The live band was in the middle of a lively, upbeat song. Guests were spinning and laughing under the crystal chandeliers. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. It was not a loud sound, but Richard, who had followed me out, saw the signal. He gestured sharply to the bandleader. The music stopped abruptly. It did not fade out gracefully. The drummer halted his rhythm mid-beat. The brass section dropped their instruments. The lead singer pulled the microphone away from his mouth, turning off the amplifier. The sudden, deafening silence that crashed over the ballroom was incredibly jarring. Hundreds of guests stopped dancing, looking around in utter confusion. Some nervously chuckled, thinking it was a planned part of the entertainment or a surprise speech. But the silence stretched on, becoming heavy and deeply uncomfortable. Then the real exodus began. At the far side of the room, a waiter carrying a massive silver tray loaded with premium cuts of beef simply stopped walking. He placed the heavy tray down on the nearest guest table right in the middle of an elaborate floral centerpiece and walked away. Across the room, another waiter carrying a dozen crystal flutes of champagne set his tray on a cocktail table and turned his back. One by one, the serving staff abandoned their posts. The synchronized clatter of silver trays and china plates hitting the tables echoed through the quiet room. At the main bar, the situation was even more dramatic. Justin had been standing there waiting for a refill of his expensive scotch. The bartender, a veteran employee named Marcus, looked at his radio, then looked at Justin. Without a single word, Marcus took the bottle of premium whiskey from the counter, twisted the cap back on, and placed it into a heavy transport box below the bar. He then began locking the liquor cabinet, snapping the heavy brass padlocks shut with loud, definitive clicks. "Hey, what are you doing?" Justin demanded, his voice echoing awkwardly in the silent room. "I asked for a drink. Open that back up." Marcus did not even look at him. He simply wiped down the marble counter, folded his towel, and walked out from behind the bar, joining the growing line of staff members gathering at the back of the room. Justin stood there, his face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and rising anger. He looked around the room, finally noticing the bizarre mass exodus of the people he thought he was paying to serve him. Vanessa was still standing near table 14, exactly where I had left her. Her arrogant smirk had vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer bewilderment. She watched as the waitresses she had verbally abused earlier quietly untied their aprons and draped them over the backs of empty chairs. She looked at the band members packing their expensive instruments into heavy black cases. She looked at the guests who were now murmuring nervously to one another, demanding to know why their half-eaten meals were being abandoned. "What is happening?" Vanessa demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. She grabbed the arm of a passing waiter. "Where are you going? Bring out the next course immediately." The waiter gently but firmly pulled his arm away from her grip. "I am sorry, Mom," he said politely. "This event has been officially terminated by the owner. We are vacating the premises." Owner Vanessa shrieked, looking wildly around the room. "Justin is the owner of this event. He paid for this. Justin, get over here and fix this right now." Justin jogged over to her, looking completely helpless. He pulled out his phone, desperately trying to call the wedding planner, but the planner was already walking toward the exit, her clipboard tucked firmly under her arm. I stood near the main entrance, adjusting the cuffs of my faded jacket. I felt a deep, profound calm. Richard walked up to stand beside me, followed closely by the executive chef. Behind them, a silent army of 45 staff members had formed a neat, organized line. They stood with quiet dignity, refusing to serve a couple who treated working-class people like dirt. I looked at my employees and offered them a nod of deep gratitude. They had my back, and I would always have theirs. I turned and began to walk toward the grand double doors of the main lobby. I did not look back. I simply walked with the steady, measured pace of a man who had nothing left to prove. Behind me, the footsteps of 45 people echoed on the marble floor, a unified march of solidarity. "Howard!" Vanessa screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet ballroom. Her tone was no longer arrogant or commanding. It was laced with absolute terror. She finally saw me leading the procession. She finally realized that the man she had banished, the man she had mocked for his shabby clothes, was the one leading the entire staff out the door. "Howard, what did you do? Tell them to come back. Justin, do something. Make them come back." Justin ran a few steps toward me, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Dad," he called out, his voice cracking. "Dad, please wait. What is going on? Why are they listening to you?" I did not stop walking. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the lobby and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. The valet attendants were already handing the keys back to the confused guests, who were beginning to wander out of the ballroom. I walked down the curved stone pathway toward the far end of the parking lot, where my rusted 10-year-old truck was parked in the shadows. I unlocked the heavy metal door and climbed into the driver's seat, the worn fabric comforting against my back. Inside the ballroom, Richard was the last man remaining. He stood near the main electrical panel at the back of the hall. He looked at Justin and Vanessa, who were standing in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by ruined food, confused guests, and utter humiliation. Richard simply shook his head, reached out, and grabbed the heavy metal lever of the master breaker. Vanessa let out one final piercing scream of pure panic, just as Richard pulled the lever down. The massive crystal chandeliers went dark instantly. The accent lights, the bar lights, the stage lights, all of them died in a fraction of a second. The entire grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club was plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The sound of hundreds of guests gasping and complaining filled the night, followed by the heavy thud of the front doors locking from the outside. I started the engine of my old truck, listening to it rumble to life, and slowly drove out of the country club, leaving my ungrateful son and his cruel bride sitting in the dark ruins of their own arrogance. The engine of my old truck hummed a steady, reliable rhythm beneath me. I sat in the far corner of the parking lot, hidden by the shadows of the ancient oak trees that lined the property. The night air was cool, seeping through the cracked window, and bringing with it the faint smell of pine needles. I rested my hands on the worn steering wheel, feeling the rough texture that came from years of hard, honest work. I did not drive away immediately. I stayed parked in the dark because I wanted to witness the true cost of arrogance. I looked through my windshield at the grand entrance of the country club. The massive double doors were usually flanked by smiling valets and warm lights. Now they were thrown wide open, revealing a chaotic sea of confused and angry people pouring out into the night. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. Men in expensive tuxedos were holding up their phones, trying to use the weak flashlight beams to navigate the darkened stone pathways. Women in silk gowns were shivering in the cool air, clutching their shawls and complaining loudly about the ruined evening. Without the valet staff to retrieve their luxury cars, a massive line had formed at the parking booth. People were shouting at each other, pushing past one another to find their vehicles. Waiters had abandoned full trays of food on the lawn, leaving expensive appetizers to be picked apart by stray birds in the morning. Security guards were nowhere to be found. I watched a man whom Vanessa had been trying to impress earlier wave his arms in frustration before marching off into the dark. The elegant, high society event Vanessa had dreamed of had devolved into a miserable, disorganized evacuation. Nobody was talking about how beautiful the bride looked. They were talking about their empty stomachs and the profound embarrassment of standing in the dark. Inside the quiet cabin of my truck, the silence was suddenly shattered. My phone, resting on the passenger seat, lit up like a beacon. The screen flashed brilliantly in the dark cabin, displaying Justin's name. The device vibrated violently against the cracked vinyl upholstery, a frantic buzzing that perfectly matched the panic I knew he was feeling. I did not pick it up. I simply watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it lit up again. Then again. It was a relentless barrage of incoming calls. Justin was desperate. He had just watched his entire fake millionaire persona crumble in front of the very people he wanted to impress. His wealthy facade was stripped away, leaving nothing but a scared, heavily indebted little boy standing in a dark room. The phone screen showed a dozen missed calls in the span of 3 minutes. Then came the text messages arriving one after another in rapid succession. They flashed briefly on the lock screen. "Dad, where are you? Turn the lights back on right now. You are humiliating us. Please pick up the phone." I read each one with a slow, steady detachment. It was remarkable how quickly his tone shifted from arrogant dismissal to frantic begging. The man who had refused to defend me against his wife's cruel insults was now demanding that I rescue him from the consequences of his own cowardice. I leaned back against the headrest and let out a long, slow breath. I felt no pity. Pity is a luxury reserved for those who make honest mistakes, not for those who calculate your worth based on what they can extract from your wallet. The phone stopped ringing for a moment, and a small icon appeared indicating a new voicemail had been left. I reached over, picked up the phone, and pressed the speaker button. I wanted to hear his voice clearly, I wanted to measure the exact level of his desperation. The message started with a heavy, ragged breath. The background noise was chaotic, filled with the overlapping voices of angry guests demanding refunds and threatening to leave negative reviews on every platform they could find. "Dad, what the hell did you just do?" Justin's voice echoed through the small cabin of my truck. He was practically hyperventilating, his words tumbling out in a rushed, panicked stream. The entire staff just walked out. They cut the power. The catering manager left us standing here with no food, and half the guests are already driving away. Vanessa is locked in the bridal suite, having a complete breakdown because her parents' friends are demanding answers. "You need to come back here and fix this right now. Tell whoever you paid off to turn the lights back on." There was a brief pause on the recording as someone shouted at Justin in the background. When he spoke again, his voice had lost the panicked edge and shifted into a pathetic attempt at intimidation. "Listen to me very carefully, old man," he snarled into the phone. "You think this is some kind of funny lesson, but you just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life. I know you paid for the venue, but you do not get to just shut it down because your feelings got hurt. We had a verbal agreement. I am holding you personally responsible for this disaster. I am going to sue you for breach of contract. I am going to drag you into court and make you pay for every single penny of the damages the venue is going to charge us for this walkout. You are going to pay for ruining my wedding." The voicemail clicked and ended, leaving a hollow beep hanging in the air. I sat there in the dark and let out a deep, genuine laugh. The sound filled the truck, a rich, booming laugh that I had not felt in years. Justin wanted to sue me for breach of contract. He wanted to hold me legally responsible for the walkout. He was so blinded by his own entitlement that he failed to grasp the magnitude of the situation. He believed the Oak Ridge Country Club was a massive, untouchable corporation that would surely penalize whoever ruined their event. He did not realize that I was the corporation. He was planning to sue the very man who owned the contract he was citing. He was threatening to take me to court over a venue penalty that I had the sole authority to issue. He thought he was backing me into a corner, using the threat of financial ruin to force my hand. What my foolish son did not know was that I had already instructed my legal team to draft the invoice for the damages. I was not going to be the one paying the penalty. I was going to be the one collecting it. I reached over and turned the radio on, letting the soft hum of a classic country station drown out the distant shouts coming from the club entrance. I shifted the truck into drive, the old transmission clunking reliably into gear. As I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the darkened venue behind me, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The flashing headlights of the departing guests looked like a funeral procession for my son's fake life. The real battle was just beginning, and Justin had already handed me the weapon I needed to destroy him completely. I drove into the night, ready for whatever came with the morning. The morning sun cast a pale light across the worn formica countertops of my kitchen. I sat at the small wooden table, gripping a thick ceramic mug filled with bitter black coffee. The house was completely silent. It was a comfortable, heavy silence that I had grown accustomed to since Martha passed away. Our home was modest, built with decades of honest labor and careful saving. The walls were painted a simple off-white, and the appliances were older, but perfectly maintained. I never saw the need to upgrade things that still worked. Justin always hated this house. He called it a depressing monument to mediocrity. To me, it was a fortress of integrity. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the dark liquid warm my throat. I felt remarkably rested. After the chaotic spectacle at the country club, the night before I had driven home, taken a hot shower, and slept for 8 solid hours. A clear conscience is the best sleep aid a man can have. My peaceful morning was violently interrupted by a rapid, aggressive pounding on my front door. The heavy wooden frame rattled under the force of the blows. The doorbell began to chime in quick, frantic bursts, echoing through the quiet hallway. I did not rush. I placed my coffee mug carefully on the table. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles out of my plaid flannel shirt. I walked down the short corridor with the slow, measured pace of a man who knows exactly what is waiting on the other side. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Justin and Vanessa stood on my small concrete porch, looking absolutely disastrous. The pristine, polished image they had projected at the wedding was completely gone. Justin was wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt from the night before, unbuttoned at the collar and stained with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, darting around frantically. Vanessa looked even worse. Her elaborate bridal hairstyle had collapsed into a tangled mess of blonde extensions and hairpins. Her heavy makeup was smeared under her eyes, leaving dark raccoon circles on her pale skin. She was shivering in the crisp morning air, wearing an oversized jacket thrown carelessly over a pair of sweatpants. They looked like two people who had just survived a shipwreck and were now desperately searching for someone to blame. "What were you thinking?" Justin screamed the moment the door swung open. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how I was doing. He launched forward, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. His voice cracked with a mixture of exhaustion and pure, unfiltered rage. "You completely destroyed my life, Howard. You ruined the most important night of my entire existence. Do you have any idea what you have done?" I stood perfectly still in the doorway, blocking their path into my home. I looked at my son, feeling a brief flicker of sorrow for the pathetic state he was in before the cold reality of his actions hardened my resolve. "I know exactly what I did, Justin," I replied, my voice low and completely devoid of emotion. "I left a party where I was not welcome." Vanessa pushed past Justin, pointing a shaking manicured finger inches from my face. "You are a spiteful, vindictive old monster," she hissed, her voice rasping from yelling all night. "You think you proved a point by throwing a tantrum and walking out. You made us the laughingstock of the entire city. My parents had to apologize to the mayor because he was left standing in a dark banquet hall. My friends are treating me like a charity case. You humiliated us in front of everyone who matters." "You humiliated yourselves, Vanessa," I said softly. "I simply turned off the lights so everyone could see you clearly." Justin slammed his hand against the wooden doorframe. "Cut the philosophical garbage, Dad," he yelled. "This is not about your hurt feelings anymore. This is about cold, hard cash. After you pulled your pathetic little stunt and shut down the venue, the general manager locked us out. He handed us a preliminary invoice on the spot. Do you understand me? He slapped us with a $50,000 penalty for the mass walkout, the breached timeline, and the ruined catering. $50,000, Dad." He ran his hands through his messy hair, pacing back and forth on my small porch like a trapped animal. "We spent the entire night calling lawyers." Justin continued, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. "We spoke to Vanessa's uncle, who works in corporate litigation. He said we have a rock-solid case against you. You verbally agreed to fund the wedding. You initiated a deliberate sabotage of a contracted event. You are completely liable for the financial fallout. We are not leaving this porch until you write us a check for $50,000 to cover the penalty you caused." Vanessa crossed her arms, nodding vigorously. "You are going to pay for every single penny." "Howard," she demanded, her tone dripping with arrogant entitlement. "And you are going to pay for a public relations firm to fix the damage you did to my reputation. If you refuse, we will drag you into court and expose you as a senile, abusive old man. We will drain every last dime of your pathetic little savings account. You are going to regret the day you ever crossed me." I stood there, letting their threats wash over me like water off a stone. They were so predictable. They used intimidation and legal threats as a shield to cover their complete lack of accountability. They believed they could bully an elderly man into opening his checkbook to fix their mistakes. They thought they held the high ground because they had spoken to a lawyer. I turned around, slowly leaving the front door open. Justin and Vanessa exchanged a look of triumphant satisfaction, believing they had successfully broken my spirit. They thought I was walking back into the house to retrieve my checkbook. I walked over to the small entryway table where I kept my mail and important documents. I picked up a thick manila folder that my attorney, Miles Foster, had couriered to my house late last night. I walked back to the front door and stepped out onto the porch, holding the folder in my right hand. "I am not writing you a check, Justin," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. Justin stepped forward, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Then we will see you in court, Dad," he threatened. "You are going to lose everything." I slowly opened the manila folder and extracted a thick packet of crisp, legally binding documents. I held the packet out toward him. Justin snatched the papers from my hand, his eyes blazing with fury. "What is this?" he snapped, looking down at the front page. "That is the master service agreement and venue contract for the Oak Ridge Country Club," I explained, keeping my gaze locked on his panicked eyes. "Turn to the last page, Justin. Look at the signature line." Justin flipped roughly through the heavy pages, his breathing quick and shallow. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. They reached the final page. There, at the bottom of the document, was the signature block for the corporate entity that owned the country club, the catering group, and the entire hospitality staff. Printed clearly beneath the signature line was the title of the Chief Executive Officer, Howard Bennett. Justin's face drained of all color instantly. The angry red flush on his cheeks vanished, leaving behind a sickly pale gray. His hands began to shake violently, causing the thick paper to rattle in the quiet morning air. He stared at my printed name and my signature, reading it over and over again, as if his brain completely refused to process the visual information. "I do not understand," Vanessa whispered, her voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant edge. Her eyes darted from the contract to my face and back again. "Howard Bennett, that is you. How is your name on the ownership contract for the country club?" "Because I own it, Vanessa," I said, my tone perfectly flat and absolute. "I own the venue. I own the catering company. I own the employment contracts of the 45 staff members you insulted. My private holding company has owned that property for over a decade. I did not just pay the $80,000 invoice for your wedding. I own the corporation that issued the invoice." Justin looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for the inevitable impact with the ground. "Dad," he finally choked out, his voice barely more than a terrified wheeze. "You own the Oak Ridge Country Club." "I do." "Justin," I confirmed, crossing my arms over my chest. "Which brings us to your demand for $50,000. You are absolutely correct about the penalty. The general manager was following my direct orders when he issued that invoice last night. However, you seem to be fundamentally confused about how this transaction is going to work. I am not paying the $50,000 penalty for the ruined event. I am the one charging you the $50,000 penalty." Vanessa stumbled backward, as if she had been physically struck. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth, a muffled gasp escaping her lips. "You breached the code of conduct outlined in the venue agreement when you verbally abused my staff," I continued, stepping forward and forcing Justin to take a step back down the porch stairs. "You caused significant financial damage through wasted inventory and operational disruption. The invoice you hold is not a threat, Justin. It is a legal debt owed to my corporation. And since you bragged so loudly to all your wealthy guests about how you funded this wedding yourself with your massive cryptocurrency windfall, I expect the payment to be rendered in full within 30 days. Justin's legs seemed to give out beneath him. He grabbed the wooden railing of my porch to steady himself, the heavy contract slipping from his trembling fingers and scattering across the concrete steps. "Dad, please," he begged, the arrogance completely wiped from his existence. "We do not have $50,000. We are completely broke. We put the entire honeymoon on credit cards. If you enforce this debt, you will bankrupt us." I looked down at the son who had threatened to let me rot in a cheap house. I looked at the woman who had demanded I hide in the back row of her wedding. I felt absolutely nothing. "Then I suggest you call Vanessa's uncle and hire that corporate lawyer," I said quietly. "Because the debt is real and my collection agency is ruthless." I stepped back inside my modest home, pushing the heavy wooden door shut. I turned the deadbolt with a loud, definitive click, locking them out in the cold morning air. I walked back into my kitchen, picked up my mug of black coffee, and took a long, satisfying sip. The coffee tasted exceptional. I stood by the kitchen window holding my coffee mug and looked out through the sheer curtains. The heavy wooden door between us was locked, but the spectacle unfolding on my front lawn required no audio for me to understand the sheer magnitude of their collapse. Justin was pacing in tight, frantic circles, kicking at the loose gravel near my driveway. Vanessa was still frozen on the concrete steps. She slowly knelt down her sweatpants, brushing against the cold stone, and began gathering the scattered pages of the venue contract Justin had dropped. Her hands were trembling so violently, the heavy parchment paper fluttered like dry leaves in the wind. I watched her assemble the pages and flip to the final sheet. Even through the glass, I could see the exact moment her reality completely shattered. She stared at the signature block. Her eyes traced the ink of my name over and over. She looked up at my modest single-story house and then over at my rusted 10-year-old truck parked in the driveway. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her brain. The man she had ordered to sit in the back row, the man she had mocked for looking like a janitor, was the absolute sovereign of the elite world she so desperately wanted to belong to. Vanessa stood up, clutching the contract to her chest. Her face was completely devoid of color. The arrogant sneer she wore like a crown was entirely gone, replaced by a mask of hollow terror. She walked down the steps toward Justin, holding the paper out as if it were a venomous snake. Justin stopped pacing and turned to her. I could hear the muffled sounds of their voices through the thick window glass. Vanessa was speaking frantically, pointing at the signature and then pointing back at my house. Justin suddenly erupted. He snatched the contract from her hands and hurled it onto the wet grass. He grabbed the sides of his head, screaming something up at the morning sky. The illusion he had so carefully crafted for his new bride was dead. He had spent the last 2 years convincing Vanessa he was a self-made cryptocurrency genius who bankrolled their lavish lifestyle. Now she knew the truth. She knew she had married a broke, desperate fraud who was completely dependent on the very father he had permitted her to humiliate. I decided I was not quite finished. The invoice Richard handed them last night was just the preliminary penalty for the walkout. It did not cover the physical destruction they left in their wake. I set my coffee mug on the counter, unlocked the front door, and pushed it open one last time. The sudden noise made them both flinch. Justin spun around, his face contorted with a venomous, panicked rage. "Are you happy now, Dad?" he screamed, marching toward the edge of my lawn, but stopping just short of the porch steps. "You proved your point. You showed everyone you are the big boss. You ruined my marriage before it even started." Vanessa is packing her bags. "Are you proud of yourself?" I stepped out onto the porch, pulling a small folded piece of paper from my shirt pocket. "I am not interested in your marriage, Justin," I replied, my voice projecting clearly over his frantic yelling. "I am interested in property damage." The general manager completed a full inventory of the ballroom after you and your guests were finally evacuated. I figured you would want the itemized list before my collection agency officially serves you. Vanessa took a hesitant step forward, her eyes wide and terrified. "What property damage?" she asked, her voice shaking so badly she could barely pronounce the words. "We did not break anything, Howard. We just stood there in the dark." "You did not," I said, looking directly at her pale face. "But your angry, hungry guests certainly did. When the lights went out and the panic set in, several tables were knocked over. That includes 12 shattered crystal centerpieces imported from Italy. It includes 4 damaged antique mahogany dining chairs. And it includes the total loss of the premium catering order. 300 portions of dry, aged Wagyu beef left to rot on the prep tables because you ordered my executive chef out of the kitchen." Justin grabbed his own hair, pulling at it in pure frustration. "You cannot bill us for food that your staff abandoned," he yelled, spit flying from his lips. "You ordered them to walk out." "I ordered them to vacate a hostile work environment." I corrected him, my tone absolutely merciless. "An environment you created when your wife physically assaulted a waitress. According to the master service agreement, which you signed, the client is entirely responsible for the cost of all perishable inventory if the event is terminated due to client misconduct. The $50,000 penalty was just the breach of contract fine. The ruined food, the damaged crystal, and the hazard pay for my cleaning crew brings your total personal debt to $82,000. Vanessa let out a choked, sobbing gasp. $82,000, she repeated, staring at Justin with a look of pure loathing. You told me you were rich, Justin. You told me you had millions in offshore accounts. Tell him to take it out of your investments. Tell him to deduct it from your portfolio right now. Justin did not look at her. He could not look at her. He stared at the ground, his chest heaving with deep, ragged breaths. I do not have a portfolio, he muttered, his voice breaking. I do not have offshore accounts, Vanessa. I do not have anything. He paid for the wedding. He paid for everything. Vanessa stared at him as if he were a complete stranger. Her entire world was built on the pursuit of status and wealth, and she had just discovered she married a man who had neither. You lied to me, she whispered, her voice dripping with disgust. You are nothing. You are a broke, pathetic loser living off your daddy's money. Justin snapped. The shame and the financial terror finally boiled over, turning into blind, violent rage. He turned away from Vanessa and let out a guttural scream. He marched toward my driveway and delivered a vicious kick to the front bumper of my old rusted truck. The heavy steel barely registered the impact, but Justin howled in pain, stumbling backward and clutching his foot. He looked up at me with tears of pure hatred streaming down his face. I will destroy you, he screamed, hobbling on one foot. I do not care how much money you have. You cannot do this to your own blood. I will find a way to make you pay for this. I will burn your life to the ground. I watched him throw his pathetic tantrum with absolute indifference. You cannot burn down a house when you do not even own the matches, Justin, I said quietly. You have 30 days to remit payment to the holding company. If you fail to pay, my lawyers will place liens on everything you own. Now get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and vandalism. Justin glared at me, his chest heaving, but he knew he was completely defeated. He limped toward the passenger side of Vanessa's car, not saying another word. Vanessa did not wait for him to get inside. The moment his hand touched the door handle, she hit the automatic locks. The loud click echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Justin stared at her through the glass, pleading silently, but Vanessa simply put the car in reverse and sped backward out of the driveway, leaving her new husband stranded on the street. I watched Justin pull his phone from his pocket and frantically try to order a rideshare. I turned around, walked back inside my house, and locked the door. I walked over to the entryway table to sort through the rest of my morning mail. There was a thick envelope from my primary bank. I tore it open, expecting a routine statement. Instead, my eyes fell upon a notice regarding a second mortgage taken out against my late wife's estate. I stared at the signature line. It was my name, but it was not my handwriting. The situation had just escalated from a civil dispute to a massive federal crime. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, dialing the direct line for Miles Foster. We had work to do. The silence that settled over my house after I locked the front door was absolute. I stood in the narrow hallway, listening to the faint sound of Justin's footsteps retreating down the driveway. He had no car and no wife to drive him home. He was entirely alone with the catastrophic consequences of his own arrogance. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet atmosphere of my home wash over me. For years, I had allowed my peace to be disturbed by his endless demands and his constant need for validation. I had allowed Vanessa to bring her toxic energy into my life because I thought it was the price I had to pay to keep my son close. That obligation was now permanently dissolved. I walked over to the small oak table near the entryway, where I kept a neat stack of the morning's mail. I set my coffee mug down on a coaster. The ceramic clinked softly against the wood. I picked up the stack of envelopes. Most of it was routine junk mail and standard utility bills. But near the bottom of the pile was a thick, heavy envelope from the primary banking institution I used for my personal finances. It was not the bank that handled my corporate holding company, but the local branch where Martha and I had opened our first joint checking account over 40 years ago. The return address was printed in bold red ink, indicating an urgent notice from the lending and mortgage department. I frowned. I had not taken out a personal loan in 3 decades. I owned my home outright. I owned my vehicles outright. My corporate acquisitions were handled through a completely different financial entity and managed by a team of accountants. There was absolutely no reason for the personal mortgage department to be sending me urgent correspondence by certified mail. I slid my thumb under the flap of the envelope and tore it open. The thick parchment paper slid out into my hands. I unfolded the document and began to read. The header of the letter was a formal notice of approval and funds disbursement for a secondary mortgage. I read the words again to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. The bank was confirming that a line of credit for $200,000 had been fully approved, and the funds had been transferred to an external escrow account. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I lowered my eyes to the property address listed as the collateral for this massive loan. It was not the house I was currently standing in. It was the address of a sprawling piece of undeveloped land and an old farmhouse in the next county over. That property was the physical manifestation of my late wife's legacy. Martha had inherited that estate from her grandparents. We had spent the first 5 years of our marriage restoring that old farmhouse with our bare hands. It was the place where we spent our weekends away from the noise of the city. Before Martha passed away, she made me promise to keep that land in the family. It was a sacred piece of our history, completely untouched by my corporate wealth. It was the one thing I valued more than any holding company or bank account. And now, according to the document in my hands, there was a $200,000 lien placed against it. I flipped to the second page of the packet. It was a photocopy of the finalized loan agreement. My eyes immediately dropped to the bottom right corner of the page to the signature block. There, written in dark blue ink, was my name. Howard Bennett. I stared at the signature for a long time. It was a very good imitation. The slope of the capital letter H and the sharp, aggressive cross of the letter T were almost identical to the way I signed my corporate checks. But it was not my handwriting. The loops were slightly too rushed, lacking the steady, even pressure I applied when writing. Furthermore, the date listed next to the forged signature was exactly 14 days ago. I closed my eyes and let my memory drift back to 2 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday evening. Justin had come over to the house unannounced. He claimed his printer was broken and he needed to print some urgent documents for a presentation at his firm. I had welcomed him in, offered him dinner, and told him he could use the computer in my home office. I remembered going into the kitchen to brew a fresh pot of coffee. I was gone for perhaps 20 minutes. When I returned to the office carrying 2 steaming mugs, Justin had looked up with a sudden guilty start. He had slammed a file drawer shut, the exact drawer where I kept the original deeds and tax documents for all my personal properties. He had laughed it off, claiming he dropped a pen, but he was sweating. He packed up his briefcase very quickly after that and left without even drinking his coffee. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Justin had not come over to print a presentation. He had come over to steal the deed information for Martha's estate. He had taken the property details, forged my signature on a loan application, and leveraged the only thing I held sacred to secure a massive line of credit. I looked back down at the document. The escrow account, where the $200,000 had been transferred, was listed under a title company. It was a title company that handled luxury real estate transactions in the city. He had stolen $200,000 from his own father to pay for the down payment on the luxury high-rise condo where he and Vanessa currently lived. Vanessa had demanded a dream home that fit her elite aesthetic. Justin, desperate to maintain the illusion that he was a wealthy cryptocurrency investor, had resorted to robbing his own family to buy her loyalty. He had mortgaged the land his mother cherished simply to impress a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a status symbol. He had risked the home where Martha and I built our lives just to keep up a pathetic, miserable facade. I placed the documents gently onto the oak table. I did not yell. I did not throw the coffee mug against the wall. The anger I felt the night before at the country club was a hot, burning fire. This new anger was completely different. This was ice. It was a freezing, absolute zero rage that settled deep into my bones. Walking out of a wedding reception was a family dispute. Refusing to pay an $80,000 penalty was a lesson in financial discipline. But forging a signature on a mortgage document was not a temper tantrum. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a felony. Justin had committed identity theft. He had committed wire fraud. He had defrauded a federally insured banking institution. He had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed with an apology or a tearful confession. He had initiated a sequence of events that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences. My son had looked me in the eye, eaten food from my kitchen, and stolen $200,000 right from under my nose. I walked over to the living room window and looked out at the empty street. The sun was shining brightly, but the world felt entirely different than it had 10 minutes ago. I realized that Justin had fundamentally miscalculated the situation. He believed I was a soft, sentimental old man who would eventually cover up his mistakes to protect the family name. He thought that even if I found out about the forged loan, I would simply pay it off to avoid a scandal. He thought my love for him would outweigh my respect for the law and my reverence for his mother's memory. He was entirely wrong. I am a businessman who built an empire in an industry full of sharks and predators. I survived in the corporate world because I never allowed sentimentality to cloud my judgment when a crime was committed. Justin was no longer just a disrespectful child. He was a hostile entity who had attacked my assets and violated the sanctity of my home. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my mobile phone. I unlocked the screen and scrolled through my contacts until I found the private number for Miles Foster. Miles was the senior partner at the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in the state. He was my personal attorney, my corporate counsel, and a man who specialized in entirely dismantling the lives of people who attempted to defraud my holding company. I pressed the call button and raised the phone to my ear. The line rang twice before the deep, smooth voice of my lawyer answered. "Good morning, Howard Miles," said his tone professional and sharp. "I did not expect to hear from you today. I assumed you would be recovering from the wedding festivities." "There is nothing to recover from, Miles," I replied, keeping my voice steady and cold. "But I need you to cancel whatever appointments you have for the remainder of the morning. We have a severe escalation to deal with." "What kind of escalation?" Miles asked. The casual tone vanishing instantly from his voice, replaced by the focused intensity of a predator catching a scent. "I am looking at a formal notice from First National Bank," I explained, walking back over to the table and staring down at the forged signature. Justin took out a $200,000 secondary mortgage on Martha's estate. He forged my signature on the application and had the funds wired to a title company to purchase the condo he lives in. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Miles finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of warmth. "Howard, that is identity theft and major bank fraud. That is a federal crime carrying serious time. If we report this, the authorities will be involved. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed down this specific avenue with your own son?" I looked at the forged signature one last time. I thought about Justin standing on my porch, threatening to expose me as an abusive old man. I thought about Vanessa screaming at the waitress. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated greed that had consumed the boy I raised. "I am absolutely certain, Miles," I stated, my voice echoing in the empty house. "I am heading to your office right now. I want you to initiate a complete forensic audit of Justin's entire life. I want to know about every credit card, every bank account, and every loan he has ever touched. He wants to play in the deep water. It is time we let him drown." I did not change out of my flannel shirt or my denim jeans. I did not put on a suit to impress the people in the sleek glass high-rise buildings of the financial district. I simply folded the forged mortgage documents carefully, placed them into the inner pocket of my jacket, and walked out to my rusted truck. The drive downtown was a blur of gray concrete and morning traffic. My mind was completely focused, cold, and sharp. For 34 years, I had operated under the assumption that my primary job was to protect my son from the harsh realities of the world. Now my primary job was to protect my late wife's legacy from my son. I pulled my truck into the subterranean parking garage of the Sterling Tower. The valet attendant, a young man who usually parked imported luxury sedans, took my keys with a polite nod. He knew exactly who I was. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. When the polished steel doors slid open, I stepped into the sprawling, minimalist reception area of Foster & Associates. The walls were lined with dark walnut paneling and abstract modern art that probably cost more than the average American home. The receptionist recognized me instantly. She did not ask if I had an appointment. She simply stood up, smiled respectfully, and gestured down the main hallway. "Mr. Foster is expecting you." "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice hushed. I bypassed the waiting area and walked directly toward the heavy double doors at the end of the corridor. I pushed them open and stepped into Miles Foster's office. Miles was standing by his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city skyline. He was 55 years old, with silver hair combed immaculately back and a tailored navy blue suit that fit him like armor. He turned around as I entered. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were incredibly sharp, assessing my posture and my expression in a fraction of a second. He walked over to his massive mahogany desk and gestured to one of the leather guest chairs. "You do not come downtown on a Sunday morning unless a building has burned down or someone has declared war, Howard," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "Which one is it?" I did not sit down. I walked over to the desk, reached into my jacket, and pulled out the folded bank documents. I tossed them onto the polished wood. They slid across the smooth surface and stopped exactly in front of him. "Both, Miles," I replied. Miles picked up the documents and began to read. He did not rush. He read every single line on the first page and then flipped to the signature block on the second. He stared at the forged signature for several long seconds. He placed the papers back down on the desk, folding his hands together. "I assume," he began, his tone perfectly neutral, "that you did not authorize a $200,000 secondary mortgage on Martha's estate." "I did not," I confirmed. "Justin forged my signature. He used the funds to secure a line of credit for the down payment on the luxury condo he currently resides in with his new wife. He accessed my private filing cabinet 2 weeks ago while I was making him coffee." Miles leaned back in his chair. A slow, chilling smile began to spread across his face. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator that had just been handed the keys to the enclosure. He tapped his index finger against his lips, considering the angles. "Wire fraud," he murmured softly, almost to himself. "Identity theft. Defrauding a federally insured financial institution. Forgery of legal documents." He looked back up at me, his eyes glittering with a dangerous, intelligent light. "Your son has been very busy, Howard." "What is our immediate legal exposure?" I asked, keeping the conversation strictly operational. "None," Miles replied instantly. "We file a formal affidavit of forgery with the bank by noon tomorrow. That freezes the account and initiates their internal fraud investigation. We concurrently file a police report to document the identity theft. The bank will immediately revoke the line of credit and demand the return of the dispersed funds from the title company. If the title company has already transferred the funds to the seller, the condo purchase falls through. If the transaction has closed, the bank will place an immediate lien on the property and initiate foreclosure proceedings against Justin." He picked up a silver pen from his desk and began rolling it between his fingers. "The civil liability is entirely his. The criminal liability is entirely his. He has constructed a perfect self-executing trap." I walked over to the window and looked down at the tiny cars moving like ants on the streets below. "I need to know the entire scope of his financial situation, Miles. If he was desperate enough to forge a mortgage document against his mother's estate, he is hiding other things. I want to know exactly what I am dealing with before I engage him directly." Miles nodded, pressing a button on his desk intercom. "Rebecca," he said, addressing his senior paralegal. I need a comprehensive forensic audit initiated immediately. The target is Justin Bennett. I want his personal bank accounts, credit card histories, investment portfolios, and any outstanding loans. I want to know where he buys his coffee and who holds the deed to his car. Pull everything. We are going scorched earth. He released the button and turned back to me. We will have the preliminary data by tomorrow evening, Howard. But you need to prepare yourself. A man who steals from his own father to buy a luxury condo is not managing his money well. The audit is going to reveal a massive deficit. We are likely looking at severe outstanding debts, perhaps even private lenders. I am prepared, I stated, my voice resolute. Find the bottom of the barrel, Miles. I want to see exactly how deep the rot goes. And I want everything documented. Every transaction, every lie, every stolen dollar. When I confront him, I want a mountain of undeniable proof. Consider it done, Miles said, sliding the forged documents into a secure red folder. He stood up from his desk and walked over to me, extending his hand. I am sorry it has come to this, Howard. I know how much you loved that boy. I shook his hand, my grip firm and uncompromising. I did love him, Miles. But the man who forged that signature is a stranger. And I do not let strangers steal from my family. I turned and walked out of the sleek downtown office, the heavy wooden doors closing behind me. The initial shock of the betrayal had completely faded, leaving only a calculated, highly organized determination. Justin thought he was a brilliant manipulator. He thought he could outsmart a man who had spent 40 years building an empire from nothing. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between pretending to be powerful and actually holding the power. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, got back into my old rusted truck, and drove out into the city, ready to dismantle my son's entire fake life piece by piece. I was in the kitchen pouring my second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. It was an aggressive, impatient sound, ringing 3 times in rapid succession. I did not rush. I walked down the hall with the same steady pace I had maintained all week. I had spent the last 2 days coordinating with Miles, pulling together every financial document, medical record, and security footage file we needed. I was prepared for an escalation, but I did not expect it to arrive on my doorstep quite so soon. I opened the door and found Justin standing on my porch. He was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, looking completely different from the panicked, broken man who had kicked my truck just days ago. His hair was perfectly styled, and his posture was rigid, radiating a false sense of authority. Standing next to him was a woman I had never seen before. She wore a sensible gray blazer and carried a thick leather clipboard. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes scanned me critically, noting my flannel shirt and worn jeans. "Dad," Justin said, his voice dripping with an exaggerated, sickeningly sweet concern. "I brought someone to see you. This is Ms. Aris from Adult Protective Services. We just want to talk." I looked at Miss Aris, then back at Justin. I did not step aside to let them in. I remained firmly in the doorway, my hand resting casually on the brass handle. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit, Miss Aris?" I asked, my tone polite but unyielding. Ms. Aris stepped forward slightly, opening her clipboard. "Mr. Bennett, we received a concerning report regarding your recent behavior," she stated, her voice measured and professional. "Your son has documented several incidents of erratic actions, sudden financial hostility, and aggressive outbursts specifically surrounding a recent family event. We are here to conduct a preliminary welfare check." Justin sighed loudly, shaking his head as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Dad, please," he pleaded, sounding like an actor, reading lines from a script. "You have not been yourself lately. Canceling the wedding venue, demanding absurd amounts of money, locking me out of the house. You are confused. I just want to help you manage things before you hurt yourself or lose everything." I stared at him, letting his words hang in the crisp morning air. The sheer audacity of his strategy was almost impressive. He was not just trying to avoid the consequences of his forgery. He was attempting a hostile takeover of my entire life. If he could convince Adult Protective Services that I was suffering from severe cognitive decline, He could petition a judge for medical power of attorney. With that power, he could seize control of my bank accounts, drain my assets, and erase the evidence of his own crimes. He was trying to bury me alive to save himself. Miss Aris, I said, turning my attention completely away from my son. I understand you have a job to do, but I must inform you that the man standing next to you is currently the subject of an active federal investigation for identity theft, wire fraud, and the forgery of a $200,000 mortgage document. Justin's face twitched, his mask of concern slipping for a fraction of a second. Miss Aris frowned, her pen hovering over her clipboard. Sir, she said cautiously, those are very serious allegations. But my primary concern today is your cognitive health. Your son claims you have been experiencing paranoid delusions regarding your finances. They are not delusions, Ms. Aris, I replied calmly. They are documented facts. I stepped back and opened the door wider, gesturing toward the living room. Please come inside. Both of you. I think we should clear this up immediately. Justin hesitated, casting a nervous glance down the street, but Miss Aris walked past him into the house. He had no choice but to follow. I led them into the living room, where I had intentionally left several manila folders resting on the coffee table. I did not offer them a seat. I walked over to the table and picked up the first folder. Justin tried to take control of the narrative the moment we were inside. You see, Ms. Aris, he said, pointing at the folders. He is obsessed with paperwork. He thinks everyone is stealing from him. It is classic paranoia. I handed the first folder directly to the social worker. Miss Aris, please review the first document I instructed. It is a comprehensive cognitive and neurological evaluation conducted just 3 weeks ago by Dr. Aris Thorne, the head of neurology at Memorial Hospital. It was a requirement for the renewal of my corporate life insurance policy. You will note that I scored in the 99th percentile for memory retention, executive function, and logical reasoning. I am entirely competent. Ms. Aris scanned the medical report, her eyes widening slightly as she read the prominent doctor's signature. I picked up the second folder and handed it to her. That is a certified copy of a fraud affidavit filed yesterday with First National Bank. It details a secondary mortgage taken out against my late wife's estate. I did not sign that document. My son did. He used the funds to purchase a luxury condominium. Justin's face drained of color. He stepped forward, his voice rising in panic. That is a lie, he shouted, pointing at me. He is making this up to ruin me. Do you see how vindictive he is? This is exactly what I am talking about. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small digital tablet. I placed it on the table and pressed play. Miss Aris, I said softly. You mentioned erratic behavior at a family event. This is security footage from the Oak Ridge Country Club, taken the night of my son's wedding reception. The cameras are equipped with high-definition audio, the screen illuminated showing the grand ballroom. The footage captured the exact moment Vanessa approached my table. The audio was crystal clear. The social worker watched in silence as Vanessa screamed at me, calling me a janitor and demanding I leave the building. She watched Justin standing at the bar, actively ignoring the abuse. And she watched me calmly stand up, button my jacket, and order the entire staff to evacuate the premises. I paused the video and looked at Ms. Aris. Does that look like the behavior of a confused man suffering from dementia? I asked. Or does it look like a business owner executing a breach of contract clause after being verbally assaulted by a hostile client? Miss Aris lowered her clipboard. She looked at the medical evaluation, then at the fraud affidavit, and finally at Justin. The professional neutrality in her expression was replaced by a sharp, condemning glare. Mr. Bennett, she said, addressing Justin, her voice ice cold, filing a false report with Adult Protective Services in an attempt to manipulate a financial investigation is a serious offense. Justin opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely trapped. The narrative he had so carefully constructed was demolished in less than 5 minutes. He looked at the folders in her hands, and then up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, cornered terror. Dad, please, he whispered, his voice cracking. Do not do this. You did this, Justin, I replied, my voice echoing in the quiet living room. You brought a government official into my home to try and steal my independence. You thought you could weaponize my age against me. I turned back to Ms. Aris. Are we finished here? I asked politely. We are absolutely finished, sir, she replied, handing the folders back to me. I apologize for the intrusion. I will be closing this case immediately. She turned to Justin. I suggest you contact a very good lawyer, Mr. Bennett. She walked out the front door without looking back. Justin stood alone in the center of my living room, the silence pressing down on him like a physical weight. He had fired his best shot, and it had missed completely. Get out of my house, Justin, I said, pointing toward the door. And do not ever come back. I directed Ms. Aris to sit on the floral-patterned sofa in the center of my living room. Justin immediately took the armchair closest to her, leaning forward, with his hands clasped together in a perfect imitation of a worried son. He had rehearsed this performance. He looked at me with wide, sorrowful eyes, shaking his head slowly, as if watching a tragic decline. I did not sit down. I walked over to the heavy oak filing cabinet in the corner of the room. It was the same cabinet Justin had snooped through 2 weeks ago to forge the mortgage documents. I pulled open the heavy top drawer. I withdrew 3 thick manila folders and walked back to the center of the room. I placed them on the glass coffee table directly in front of the social worker. Justin reached for the first folder, but I placed my hand firmly on top of it. These are for the state investigator. Justin, I said, my voice perfectly level. You lost the privilege of reviewing my personal documents the moment you forged my signature to buy a luxury condominium. Ms. Aris frowned slightly, looking between the two of us. She pulled the first folder toward her and opened it. Miss Aris, I said, standing tall with my hand clasped behind my back. Your report claims I am suffering from severe cognitive decline and paranoia. Inside that folder, you will find a comprehensive neurological and psychiatric evaluation. It was conducted exactly 18 days ago by Dr. Arthur Sterling, the Chief of Neurology at the State Medical Board. It was a mandatory requirement for renewing my corporate executive life insurance policy. Justin scoffed loudly, waving his hand in dismissal. Doctors can be fooled, Ms. Aris. He interrupted, his voice thick with fake exasperation. My father can hold it together for an hour in a clinic, but you did not see him at the wedding. He was completely unhinged. Miss Aris did not look at Justin. She was reading the medical report, her eyes scanning the detailed paragraphs. I watched her professional demeanor shift from skeptical to highly attentive. She noted the cognitive test scores, the brain scan results, and the doctor's definitive conclusion that my mental faculties were in the top 1% for my age bracket. She closed the folder and looked up at me with a new level of respect. I tapped the second folder on the table. The report also claims I am experiencing paranoid delusions regarding my finances and that I abruptly cut off my son for no rational reason. Please open the second file. Ms. Aris opened the folder. Inside was a certified copy of my most recent corporate tax return, alongside the operating agreement for my private holding company. Justin craned his neck, trying to see the numbers printed on the heavy parchment paper. When he caught a glimpse of the gross annual revenue, his face completely drained of color. He fell back against the armchair, as if he had been physically struck. You will see, Ms. Aris, I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet room, that I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of a hospitality and real estate empire that generates tens of millions of dollars annually. I manage a board of directors. I oversee acquisitions. I do not have delusions about my finances. My finances are meticulously audited by a team of certified public accountants. I abruptly cut off my son's allowance because I discovered he was using my monies to fund a lavish fake lifestyle while openly allowing his new wife to humiliate me in public. That is a lie, Justin shouted, jumping up from the armchair. He is twisting the story. Vanessa was stressed about the wedding, and he blew everything out of proportion to punish us. He shut down the entire venue because he threw a senile temper tantrum. I picked up the third item from the table, which was not a folder, but a sleek digital tablet. I unlocked the screen and handed it directly to the social worker. Miss Aris, I said quietly, You are tasked with determining if I had an erratic, psychotic break at the Oak Ridge Country Club. I own the Oak Ridge Country Club. That tablet contains the high-definition security footage from the main ballroom and the catering kitchen. It includes crystal-clear audio. Please press play. Miss Aris tapped the screen. The quiet living room was suddenly filled with the sound of the wedding reception. The video showed me sitting quietly at a table in the back corner. Then Vanessa stormed onto the screen. Her shrill, vicious voice played loudly through the tablet speakers. Ms. Aris watched as Vanessa screamed at me, calling me a cheap, bitter old man and a janitor who wandered in off the street. She watched Justin standing at the bar, drinking a glass of scotch and deliberately looking the other way, while his father was being verbally abused. Then the footage showed my reaction. Miss Aris watched me calmly wipe my mouth, stand up, button my jacket, and tell Vanessa that respect is earned, not bought. She watched me walk into the kitchen without a single raised voice or erratic gesture, and instruct my general manager to legally terminate the event due to client hostility. I paused the video. "Does that look like a man suffering from dementia, Ms. Aris?" I asked. "Or does it look like a corporate executive enforcing a breach of contract after being verbally assaulted on his own property?" Ms. Aris placed the tablet down on the coffee table. She slowly closed the folders and arranged them in a neat pile. The neutral expression she had worn when she arrived was completely gone. She turned slowly to face Justin. The look she gave him was pure, absolute disgust. Justin swallowed hard, stepping backward until the back of his knees hit the armchair. "Ms. Aris, please," he stammered, a nervous sweat breaking out on his forehead. "You have to understand he is manipulating the context. Mr. Bennett." Miss Aris said, her voice sharp and incredibly cold, cutting him off completely. "My agency exists to protect vulnerable elderly citizens from exploitation and abuse. We are severely underfunded, and we have hundreds of critical cases involving people who actually need our help. You brought me into this home under false pretenses to weaponize my authority against a perfectly healthy man." She picked up her thick leather clipboard and stood up, towering over him morally. "You attempted to use Adult Protective Services to lay the groundwork for a fraudulent medical power of attorney. That is not just a waste of state resources. It is a crime. I am closing this case immediately. Furthermore, I am filing a formal notation in our system regarding your malicious intent. If you ever contact our agency again, I will personally refer your actions to the district attorney's office for filing a false government report." Justin opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer authority in her voice crushed whatever lie he was about to tell. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes, completely defeated. Miss Aris turned to me and offered a brief, respectful nod. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Bennett," she said. "It is clear you have everything completely under control." "Thank you for your time, Miss Aris," I replied, walking her toward the front hallway. I opened the door and let the cool morning air flow into the house. Miss Aris walked out down the steps and got into her state-issued sedan, driving away without looking back. I left the front door wide open and turned back to the living room. Justin was still standing near the coffee table looking at the folders. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely out of options. His final desperate ambush had failed, and now he was alone in the room with the man he had tried to destroy. The remainder of that day passed in a state of suspended animation. I moved through my house performing simple tasks with mechanical precision. I watered the plants on the back patio. I organized the tools in my garage. I even cooked a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables, though I had no real appetite. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The silence was not peaceful anymore. It was the tense, heavy quiet that precedes a massive storm. The knowledge of Justin's forgery had fundamentally altered the landscape of my life. He was no longer just an ungrateful son. He was a criminal adversary. It was shortly after 8 o'clock in the evening when my mobile phone finally shattered the silence. The screen displayed Miles Foster's private number. I set my dish towel down on the kitchen counter and answered the call. "Good evening, Miles," I said, my voice steady. Tell me you have something concrete. Good evening, Howard Miles replied, his tone devoid of any pleasantries. His voice was sharp, clipped, and intensely focused. The forensic accounting team has been working non-stop since you left the office. We have initiated the fraud protocols with First National Bank. They have officially frozen the escrow account connected to the forged mortgage. Justin cannot access those funds. The condo purchase is stalled. Excellent, I said, feeling a small measure of satisfaction. That cuts off his immediate escape route. What about the audit? Did you find the bottom of the barrel? Miles let out a low, humorless chuckle that sounded more like a growl. Howard, he said, we did not just find the bottom of the barrel. We found an entirely new barrel buried underneath it. Your son's financial situation is not merely a deficit. It is a catastrophic collapse. But that is not the most alarming piece of information we uncovered. I frowned, leaning against the kitchen counter. Explain. Let us start with Justin, Miles, began the rustling of thick paper audible through the receiver. He is completely insolvent. He has maxed out 7 different high-yield credit cards over the past 18 months. He owes approximately $65,000 in unsecured consumer debt alone. His cryptocurrency investments, which he bragged so loudly about, are virtually non-existent. He bought high, sold low, and effectively liquidated his own portfolio to cover the interest payments on his credit cards. He does not have a single tangible asset to his name. The luxury car he drives is leased, and he is 3 months behind on the payments. I closed my eyes, rubbing the bridge of my nose. He had built an entire life out of smoke and mirrors. He had desperately tried to construct an image of a successful elite entrepreneur while drowning in a sea of debt. He forged a mortgage on his mother's estate because he literally had no other options left to maintain the facade. It is pathetic, I murmured. But it is exactly what I expected. What is the alarming part, Miles? The alarming part concerns his new bride, Miles stated, his voice dropping to a serious analytical register. When my team began tracking the financial flow, we obviously looked at the $80,000 you transferred to Justin for the wedding expenses. We assumed, given his massive debt, that he might have siphoned some of that money to pay off his credit cards. Did he? I asked. No, Miles replied. Justin actually transferred the entire $80,000 directly into a joint checking account he opened with Vanessa 3 months ago. He explicitly designated those funds for the wedding vendors. The problem, Howard, is not how Justin spent the money. The problem is how Vanessa spent the money. I straightened up, gripping the phone tighter. What did she do? Vanessa was put in charge of paying the vendors, Miles explained. She was the one writing the checks for the country club, the florist, and the band. But my forensic team noticed a severe discrepancy in the outgoing wire transfers. Over the course of the last 8 weeks, Vanessa initiated 5 separate transfers from that joint account. These transfers were labeled as miscellaneous vendor fees and administrative deposits. But they did not go to any wedding vendors, Howard. Where did they go? I demanded, my pulse quickening. They went to a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Miles said, the revelation landing like a physical blow. An account registered under the name Vanessa Sterling, her maiden name. She systematically embezzled $25,000 of your money right out from under Justin's nose. The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. I stood there staring blankly at the dark window, trying to process the sheer magnitude of the deception. Vanessa had not just married Justin for his perceived wealth. She had not just tolerated his arrogant lies because she thought he was a self-made millionaire. She was actively stealing from him before they even walked down the aisle. She had recognized that he was a desperate, easily manipulated fool, and she had immediately begun siphoning funds to build her own secret safety net. She was embezzling from the wedding fund. I whispered the reality of the situation, clicking into place. Exactly, Miles confirmed. She skimmed nearly 1/3 of the entire budget you provided. She knew Justin was desperate to impress her. She knew he would never scrutinize the vendor invoices because he was too busy trying to look like a big shot. She essentially charged him a $25,000 premium just to show up at the altar. The cold calculation of it was staggering. Vanessa was not just a snobby, entitled bride. She was a financial predator. She had looked at my son, saw a weak, insecure man pretending to be rich, and decided to extract every possible dollar she could before the inevitable collapse. And she had funded that extraction using the very money I had given Justin to protect his pride. "Do we have absolute proof of these transfers, Miles?" I asked, my mind racing ahead to the strategic implications. "We have the routing numbers, the time-stamped wire confirmations, and the destination account registry," Miles replied confidently. "The paper trail is completely undeniable. She used a very basic shell company structure to move the money, but my team tore through it in less than an hour. She is not a criminal mastermind, Howard. She is just an opportunistic thief." I began to pace the length of the kitchen, the hardwood floor creaking softly beneath my boots. The dynamic of the situation had completely shifted. Justin and Vanessa were not a united front of arrogant elites. They were two desperate frauds secretly stealing from each other. Justin had forged a mortgage to buy her a condo. Vanessa had embezzled his wedding funds to build an escape hatch. They were a house of cards built on a foundation of mutual betrayal. "Miles," I said, stopping in the center of the room. "This changes everything." "Yes, it does," Miles agreed. "We now have leverage over both of them. We have Justin on federal bank fraud and forgery. We have Vanessa on wire fraud and embezzlement. We have the ability to initiate criminal proceedings against both the bride and the groom. The question is, how do you want to play this, Howard? Do we hand the files over to the district attorney right now and let the police sweep them up?" I thought about Justin standing on my porch threatening to expose me as a senile, abusive man. I thought about Vanessa screaming at the waitress and demanding I sit in the back row. I thought about the sheer disrespect, the absolute lack of humanity they had both displayed. I did not just want them arrested. I wanted them completely dismantled. I wanted them to face each other and realize exactly what they had done. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. "We do not call the police yet. If we just hand this over to the authorities, they will hire lawyers and drag this out in the courts for years. They will spin a narrative. They will blame each other. I want them to tear each other apart in front of me." "What is the play?" Howard, Miles asked, recognizing the tone in my voice. "Prepare 2 separate dossiers," I instructed. One containing all the evidence of Justin's forgery and the fraudulent mortgage. The second containing the wire transfers and the proof of Vanessa's offshore embezzlement. I want hard copies of everything, meticulously documented and undeniably verified. "Understood," Miles said. "And then what?" "And then we invite them to the corporate office," I replied, a cold, grim smile forming on my lips. "We invite them to the boardroom. We let them think they are coming in to negotiate a settlement regarding the venue penalty. We get them in the same room. And then we drop the guillotine." "It is a ruthless strategy," Howard. Miles noted a hint of professional admiration in his voice. "You are setting them up for a complete psychological collapse before the legal hammer falls." "They earned it, Miles," I stated simply. "Have the dossiers ready by tomorrow morning. I am going to make a phone call." I ended the call and placed the phone down on the counter. The heavy, oppressive silence in the house felt entirely different now. It was no longer the silence of an impending storm. It was the silence of a trap that had just been perfectly set. I picked up my phone again, scrolled to Justin's number, and pressed call. It was time to invite the bride and groom to their final reception. The next morning, the sky outside my window was a flat, unforgiving gray. The kind of sky that promises a storm but refuses to break. I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping my second cup of coffee. The silence of the house was absolute save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I had spent the last 48 hours dismantling my son's life with surgical precision, and now I was waiting for the inevitable consequences to catch up to him. It was precisely 10 o'clock when my phone finally rang. I didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. The frantic, erratic vibration against the wooden table was a dead giveaway. I took a slow, deep breath, centering myself before picking it up. "Dad." The voice on the other end was a cracked, desperate whisper. It was a voice I hadn't heard since Justin was a teenager, a voice stripped of all its arrogant posturing and false bravado. "I am here, Justin," I replied, my tone deliberately calm, betraying nothing. "Dad, I need you. I really need you." The words tumbled out of him, rushed and panicked. "Something is happening. Something is very, very wrong. The bank, First National, they called me this morning. They said there's a problem with the transaction. They said my accounts are frozen. All of them. And my credit cards are declining everywhere." I listened to his rising hysteria, a cold detachment settling over me. "What kind of problem with a transaction, Justin?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "I don't know," he cried out, his voice cracking. "They wouldn't tell me over the phone. They just said it's related to an internal fraud investigation. Dad, I don't know what to do. Vanessa is losing her mind. She tried to use her card to pay for a hotel, and it declined. We can't even buy gas. I'm locked out of everything." He paused, a sharp intake of breath echoing through the line. "Dad, listen to me. I know I messed up. I know I was out of line at the wedding. The things I said, the things Vanessa said, it was unacceptable. I was just stressed and I took it out on you. But I need you to help me. I need you to call the bank. Maybe you can clear this up. If anyone can fix this, it's you." The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Even now, facing total financial ruin, his first instinct was to manipulate me into saving him. He was trying to buy his way out of a felony with a half-hearted apology for a ruined wedding reception. "You want me to call First National?" I asked, my voice low and dangerously quiet. "Yes, please, Dad. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them whatever they need to hear to unfreeze the accounts. I promise I'll pay you back. I'll get a better job. I'll downsize. I'll do whatever it takes. Just please don't let them ruin me." I let the silence stretch out long and heavy, allowing his desperation to fill the space between us. When I finally spoke, every word was a calculated strike. "I can't call the bank and tell them it's a mistake, Justin," I said, my voice echoing in the empty kitchen. "Because it isn't a mistake." "What are you talking about?" His voice was barely a squeak. "I know about the secondary mortgage on your mother's estate, Justin." I said, the words falling like stones. "I know about the $200,000 line of credit. And I know about the forged signature on the application." There was no sound on the other end. Not a breath, not a sigh, not even the rustle of clothing. It was the sound of a man realizing he was trapped in a burning building with no exits. "I saw the documents, Justin." I continued, my voice relentless. "You broke into my filing cabinet, stole the deed information, and forged my name to buy a luxury condo for a woman who treats you like an ATM. You didn't just disrespect me. You committed a federal crime." "Dad, no, wait, please." The panic in his voice had morphed into sheer, unadulterated terror. "It's not what you think. I was desperate. Vanessa was threatening to leave me if we didn't get that condo. I didn't want to lose her. I was going to pay it back, I swear. I was going to sell some investments and cover the loan before you ever found out." "You don't have any investments, Justin," I stated, cutting through his lies with clinical precision. "Miles Foster conducted a full forensic audit of your finances yesterday. You are completely insolvent. You have maxed out 7 credit cards and you don't have a single tangible asset to your name. You were never going to pay it back. You were going to let me lose your mother's legacy to cover your pathetic facade." "Dad, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." He was crying now, loud, ugly sobs echoing through the phone. "Please don't do this. If they press charges, I'll go to prison. I'll lose everything. You have to stop them. You have to call them off." "I am the one who initiated the fraud investigation, Justin." I said, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "I filed the affidavit of forgery. I froze the accounts. You are the one who set this in motion, but I am the one controlling the outcome." His sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense, hyperventilating breath. "What? What do you want from me?" he whispered. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the gray sky. The trap was fully sprung, and now it was time to close it. I want you to come to my corporate office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. I instructed, my voice hard and unforgiving. Bring Vanessa with you. We are going to sit down in the boardroom, and we are going to settle everything. Do not be late. I ended the call before he could respond, tossing the phone onto the table. The silence returned to the kitchen, but it felt different now. The storm had finally broken, and the air was crisp, clean, and ready for the final confrontation. What do you think of this? Is there anything you would like to change or adjust? I sat at the head of the massive mahogany conference table on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Tower. The room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but inside the atmosphere was cold and unforgiving. Miles Foster sat to my right. His posture was impeccably straight. A sleek leather briefcase rested on the table in front of him. To my left sat Detective Vance from the Financial Crimes Division. He wore a simple gray suit and carried an aura of quiet, absolute authority. We sat in silence, waiting for the elevator doors down the hall to open. The trap was fully set. I was about to drop the corporate guillotine on the two people who thought they could destroy my life and steal my late wife's legacy. Promptly at 9 o'clock, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. Justin walked in first, followed closely by Vanessa. They looked entirely out of place in the sterile corporate environment. Justin was wearing a wrinkled suit that looked like he had slept in it. Vanessa wore a large pair of designer sunglasses, hiding her bloodshot eyes. She clutched her expensive handbag tightly to her chest. Despite their exhausted and terrified appearance, they still carried a faint glimmer of arrogant hope. They walked into the room expecting a severe lecture followed by a financial bailout. They believed this was a family intervention. They thought I brought them here to yell at them before writing a heavy check to unfreeze their accounts. Justin stopped halfway into the room when he noticed the other two men sitting at the table. He looked at Miles and then at the detective. His steps faltered. "Dad," he began, his voice sounding small and weak in the cavernous space. "Who are these people? I thought we were going to settle this between us." "We are settling this right now, Justin," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Have a seat, both of you." Justin pulled out a heavy leather chair and sat down slowly. Vanessa sat next to him, keeping her sunglasses firmly on her face. She crossed her arms. She looked defensive and impatient. "Howard, I hope this does not take long," she said, her voice carrying a trace of her usual entitlement. "We have been through a lot of stress this morning and we need to get our bank accounts unlocked immediately." I looked at the woman who had demanded I sit in the back row of my son's wedding. I felt absolutely no pity for her. "Vanessa," I said softly, "the men sitting next to me are here to ensure that every aspect of your stress is thoroughly documented. On my right is my corporate counsel, Miles Foster. On my left is Detective Vance." Justin swallowed hard. The sound was audible in the quiet room. "Detective," he repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "Dad, what is a detective doing here? I thought you said you were going to fix the mortgage issue." "I said we were going to settle everything," I corrected him. "And to do that, we need to look at exactly what you have both been doing with my money." I reached across the smooth mahogany surface and picked up the first thick manila folder. I slid it across the long table. It stopped directly in front of Justin. "Open it, Justin," I instructed. "Look at the life you built." Justin reached out with trembling hands. He opened the folder. Inside were the high-resolution copies of the forged mortgage application. The fraudulent signature stared back at him. The exact routing details of the $200,000 line of credit he had stolen from his late mother's estate were highlighted in yellow ink. Alongside those documents were the devastating results of his forensic financial audit. The pages showed his maxed-out credit cards and his complete insolvency. Justin stared at the papers. His breathing became shallow and rapid. "Dad, please," he whispered, a tear slipping down his pale cheek. "I can explain all of this. I just needed a little more time. I was going to make it right." "You are looking at federal bank fraud, Justin. I stated, my tone entirely merciless. You committed identity theft against your own father to buy a luxury condominium you could not afford. Detective Vance has already reviewed these documents. He has the original bank statements. He has the security footage of you accessing my filing cabinet. The bank has officially classified the transaction as a felony crime. Vanessa leaned over and looked at the documents in Justin's folder. Her eyes widened behind her sunglasses. She suddenly realized the depth of Justin's financial ruin. He had nothing. The millionaire she thought she married was a total fraud who was about to go to federal prison. You idiot, she hissed at him, pulling away as if he were diseased. You lied to me. You told me you were liquidating your cryptocurrency portfolio. You stole from your own father to buy my house. You are pathetic. Justin shrunk under her verbal assault. Before he could respond, I picked up the second manila folder. This folder was noticeably thicker than the first. I placed my hand flat on top of it. Do not be so quick to judge him, Vanessa, I said, projecting my voice so it commanded the entire room. My son is a desperate fool who committed forgery to impress a woman who despises him. But he is not the only person in this room who belongs behind bars. I slid the second folder across the table. It stopped right in front of her. Vanessa stared at it, her jaw tightening. What is this? She demanded, trying to sound defiant, but her voice shook. Open it, I commanded. Vanessa slowly flipped open the cover. The top page was a printed spreadsheet highlighting 5 specific wire transfers. The subsequent pages contained offshore bank account registries and routing numbers. I watched her face transform from arrogant anger to pure, unadulterated terror. She ripped off her sunglasses, staring at the financial records that proved her absolute ruin. When Justin came to me begging for money to save his wedding, I gave him $80,000, I explained to the room. I gave it to him to protect his pride. Justin deposited that money into a joint account and foolishly trusted you to pay the vendors, Vanessa. But you did not pay the vendors, did you? You systematically embezzled $25,000 of my money. You routed it through a shell company and deposited it into a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands under your maiden name. Justin whipped his head around to stare at his new bride. His mouth hung open. What? He gasped, his voice breaking. Vanessa, what is he talking about? You stole the wedding money. You told me the caterer required massive upfront deposits. She was skimming off the top, Justin, I told him. She knew you were a fake. She knew the money was running out, and she decided to build herself a golden parachute using the funds I provided for your marriage. She robbed you blind before you even walked down the aisle. Vanessa slammed the folder shut. This is a violation of my privacy, she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. You have no right to look into my personal accounts, Howard. You cannot prove anything. Miles Foster leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Actually, Mrs. Bennett, we have absolute proof, Miles stated, his voice smooth and deadly. We tracked the digital footprint directly from the joint account to your offshore registry. The financial trail is undeniable. You committed wire fraud and grand theft embezzlement. The district attorney will have a very easy time securing a conviction. Justin grabbed Vanessa's arm, his face twisted in pure agony and rage. You stole from me, he yelled. I ruined my life for you. I forged my father's name to buy you a condo, and you were stealing from me the whole time. Get your hands off me, you broke! Loser, Vanessa shrieked, shoving him away. You lied to me from the beginning. You promised me a life of luxury, and you have nothing. I deserve that money for putting up with your pathetic lies. I sat back in my leather chair and watched the two of them tear each other apart. The grand illusion they had built was completely demolished. They were no longer a glamorous elite couple looking down on the working class. They were two common criminals turning on each other the moment the trap snapped shut. The corporate guillotine had fallen, and it severed every lie they had ever told. They blamed each other, screaming across the table, while their entire future disintegrated into dust. Detective Vance finally stood up from the table. He reached behind his back and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clink silenced the room instantly. Justin and Vanessa froze, staring at the detective with wide, horrified eyes. The time for negotiations and empty apologies was officially over. The heavy steel handcuffs rested on the polished mahogany table. The metallic clink had severed whatever fragile bond remained between the bride and the groom. Vanessa scrambled out of her leather chair, putting as much physical distance between herself and Justin as possible. She pressed her back against the floor-to-ceiling window, breathing heavily. She pointed a manicured finger at the man she had sworn to love just days ago. She looked at Detective Vance and began to speak rapidly, her voice dripping with desperation. "You cannot arrest me," she pleaded. "I had absolutely nothing to do with that forged mortgage. Justin handles all the finances. He lied to me from the very beginning. He told me he was a millionaire, and I believed him. I am a victim of his deception." Justin stared at her. His face twisted into a mask of pure betrayal. "You are a victim," he yelled, taking a step toward her before Miles Foster stood up and blocked his path. "You drained my wedding fund. You stole $25,000 from the money my father gave us. You were packing a golden parachute while making me buy you a $200,000 luxury condo. You demanded that specific unit, Vanessa. You said you would cancel the wedding if we did not move into that exact building. I committed forgery to give you what you wanted." Vanessa crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with venom. "I demanded a lifestyle you promised you could afford." She snapped back, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "I did not tell you to commit a federal crime. I am not responsible for your pathetic inability to generate real wealth. You are a complete fraud, Justin. You stole from your own father because you are too weak to build anything yourself." Justin slammed his fist onto the conference table. "And you are a common thief," he roared back. "You embezzled from the man sitting right across from you. You stole money meant to pay the very caterers you humiliated at the reception. You think the police are going to let you walk away because you claim you were tricked. You routed stolen cash to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. That requires premeditation, Vanessa. You are going to prison right alongside me." I sat back in my leather chair and watched them tear each other to pieces. It was a brutal, pathetic display of self-preservation. There was no loyalty between them. There was no love. The illusion of their elite power couple status had completely evaporated. They were like two rats trapped in a sinking ship, biting and clawing at each other to stay above the water. For years, I had watched Justin pretend to be something he was not. I had watched him adopt a sneering, arrogant persona to fit into Vanessa's shallow world. Now that fake world was collapsing, and they were ripping out each other's throats to survive, Detective Vance remained perfectly still, his hands resting on his belt. He let them confess their crimes to each other in a room full of witnesses. Every accusation they hurled across the boardroom was another piece of evidence for the prosecution. Miles Foster took meticulous notes on a legal pad capturing every admission of guilt. Vanessa began to cry, real tears of panic streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Howard, please," she begged, turning her attention back to me. "You have to understand my position. I was terrified. I found out Justin was deeply in debt just weeks before the wedding. I transferred that money because I needed a safety net. I was trying to protect my own future. I will give the money back. I will wire the $25,000 back to your account right now. Just please tell the detective to let me go." I looked at her tear-stained face. The woman who had proudly banished me from my own son's wedding was now begging for my mercy. "You cannot return money to buy your way out of a felony." "Vanessa," I said, my voice quiet and absolute. "The crime was committed the moment you initiated the fraudulent transfer. You stole from my holding company to enrich yourself." Justin let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Do not bother begging him, Vanessa." He spat, his eyes burning with resentment. "He has been planning this since the night of the reception. He wants to see us destroyed. He is loving every second of this." "I am not loving this, Justin," I corrected him, my tone dropping to a heavy, somber register. "It brings me absolutely no joy to watch my son self-destruct. But I am not going to shield you from the consequences of your actions anymore. You chose to commit bank fraud. Vanessa chose to commit embezzlement. You built a marriage on mutual theft. There is one final matter we need to address before Detective Vance takes over, I announced, pulling a third and final document from my inner jacket pocket. I placed it flat on the mahogany table. Justin and Vanessa stopped arguing and stared at the paper. They were completely exhausted, completely drained of their arrogant energy. When you forged my signature to secure that mortgage, Justin, you had the funds wired to an escrow account managed by a luxury title company, I explained. You used those funds to finalize the purchase of your penthouse condominium in the downtown district. You moved all your furniture and belongings into that unit 2 days before the wedding. Justin nodded slowly, his chest heaving. Yes, he muttered. That is my apartment. It is not your apartment, Justin, I stated coldly. You see, the title company you used is a subsidiary of my private holding corporation. When the bank froze the fraudulent escrow funds yesterday morning, the title company immediately invalidated your purchase agreement. Vanessa gasped, taking a step forward. What does that mean? She demanded. It means the deed to that luxury condominium reverted back to the parent company, I explained, looking directly into her panicked eyes. It means my holding corporation owns the apartment you are currently living in. And because you have no valid lease and no legal ownership, you are officially trespassing on my corporate property. I slid the paper across the table. It was a formal immediate eviction notice. You have 0 days to vacate the premises, I told them. My security team is currently at the condominium boxing up your personal belongings. They will leave the boxes on the sidewalk. You have absolutely no access to the building. You have no home. You have no money. You have nothing. Vanessa covered her face with her hands, letting out a loud, agonizing wail. She collapsed into one of the leather chairs, completely broken. Justin stood frozen, staring at the eviction notice as if it were written in a foreign language. The reality of his total ruin finally crushed whatever defiance he had left. He had tried to steal my legacy to buy a fake life, and now he was left with absolutely nothing at all. The heavy silence in the boardroom was broken only by the sound of Vanessa crying softly into her hands. Detective Vance moved with practiced efficiency. He stepped around the large mahogany table and approached Justin. Justin did not try to run or argue. There was nowhere left to go and no lie left to tell. He simply stood up, his shoulders slumped, looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had walked into the building just 30 minutes ago. Vance reached out and grasped Justin by the arm, turning him around gently but firmly. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly as they locked around my son's wrists. The metallic sound echoed off the glass walls, marking the absolute end of his fraudulent life. Vance spoke in a calm, authoritative tone, reciting the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Justin kept his head down. He did not look at me. He did not look at Vanessa. He stared at the plush carpet beneath his feet as the detective guided him toward the heavy glass doors. Just before they crossed the threshold, Justin stopped. He turned his head slightly, offering one final pathetic glance over his shoulder. I offered him nothing in return. No anger. No pity. Just the cold, hard stare of a man who had finally cut out a toxic infection. Vance nudged him forward, and they disappeared down the long corridor, heading for the service elevator that would take my son down to a waiting police cruiser. I turned my attention back to Vanessa. She was still sitting in the leather chair, wiping her ruined makeup with a trembling hand. She watched Justin leave, and a brief flash of relief washed over her face. She thought she had survived. She believed that because she was not leaving in handcuffs today, she had somehow won. She picked up her expensive designer handbag and stood up, trying to muster whatever shred of dignity she had left. I will be contacting my own lawyers, she said, her voice shaking but attempting to sound defiant. You cannot just throw my things on the street. I have rights. Miles Foster closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. You have the right to leave this building immediately. Mrs. Bennett, he stated, his voice completely devoid of warmth. You are not being arrested today because the district attorney is still assembling the federal wire fraud charges against you. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. The indictment will be arriving in the mail very soon, and do not bother trying to access that offshore account in the Cayman Islands. My forensic team handed those routing numbers directly to federal investigators. The account has been frozen and seized. You have absolutely zero access to the money you stole. Vanessa swallowed hard, her hand gripping the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She turned toward the door, desperate to escape the room. "Before you go, Vanessa," I said, making her stop in her tracks, "there is one last piece of business." She looked back at me, her eyes wide with lingering terror. "The $82,000 penalty for the ruined wedding reception still stands," I reminded her. "Since you and Justin signed the venue contract jointly, you are both equally liable for the debt. My collection agency will be aggressively pursuing your future wages, your assets, and your bank accounts. You walked into my life demanding luxury, and you are walking out with nothing but the clothes on your back and a massive debt to the very people you insulted." She opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer weight of her reality crushed the words before they could form. She had no husband to leech off. She had no luxury condo to return to. Her reputation among her elite friends would be completely destroyed the moment the news of the embezzlement and the eviction became public. She was walking out into the cold city streets without a dollar to her name to even call a taxi. She turned around and practically ran out of the boardroom. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind her, sealing her fate. I stood alone in the quiet corporate suite with my lawyer, listening to the sound of her frantic footsteps fading away into the distance. The corporate guillotine had fallen, and the execution was a complete success. 6 months passed since the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung shut. The changing of the seasons brought a crisp autumn chill to the air. I sat on the wooden porch of my modest single-story home, resting my hands around a warm ceramic mug of black coffee. The neighborhood was quiet and still, just the way Martha and I had always loved it. The rustling leaves falling from the old oak tree in the front yard sounded like a gentle whisper of approval. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The chaotic noise of arrogant demands and toxic entitlement was completely gone from my life. It had been surgically removed, and the healing process was going remarkably well. The legal battles had concluded precisely as Miles Foster predicted. The fraudulent secondary mortgage was entirely expunged from the public records. Martha's sacred estate in the country was safe and secure, completely untouched by the greed that had tried to consume it. Justin was currently serving a federal prison sentence for identity theft and bank fraud. He had tried to plead for leniency, but the judge was unswayed by his tears. Vanessa had taken a plea deal to avoid federal prison time for wire fraud. She avoided a cell, but she was stripped of every stolen dollar and was now working a minimum wage retail job in a different city, desperately trying to pay back the $82,000 restitution she owed my holding company. They had wanted luxury without labor, and they had earned themselves absolute ruin instead. I felt no sorrow when I thought of them now. I felt no lingering anger or resentment. I had mourned the loss of my son a long time ago, when I realized the boy I raised had been replaced by a greedy stranger. Now there was only a profound, unshakable quiet in my heart. I set my coffee mug down on the small wooden table next to my rocking chair. I reached over and unrolled a large, thick cylinder of heavy paper, flattening the corners down with 2 smooth stones. They were architectural blueprints. The detailed schematic drawings showed a sprawling modern facility surrounded by open green spaces and community gardens. The bold printed letters across the top of the title block read, "The Martha Bennett Community Center." I traced my fingers over the blue lines detailing the interior spaces. There was a large commercial kitchen designed to offer free culinary training programs to underprivileged youth trying to find a stable career. There was a massive workshop wing dedicated to teaching trade skills like carpentry and plumbing. It was a place designed to build real, tangible futures for people who were willing to put in an honest day's work. It was the exact opposite of the shallow, superficial country club lifestyle that Justin and Vanessa had worshipped. I had instructed my corporate board to allocate a massive grant to fund the entire construction and operational endowment of the center. I was finally using the vast resources of my holding company to honor the woman who had helped me build it all from nothing. Martha never cared about imported crystal centerpieces or expensive tropical honeymoons. She cared about lifting people up and giving them the tools to support themselves. When the doors of this center opened, her true legacy would live on in every single person who learned a trade and secured a better life for their family. I rolled the blueprints back up and tucked them safely into their protective casing. I leaned back in my wooden rocking chair, listening to it creak softly against the porch floorboards. I looked down at my faded flannel shirt and my scuffed leather boots. I did not need a tailored tuxedo to prove I was successful. I did not need a luxury condominium to feel secure. True class is not something you can wear, and respect is not something you can purchase with a stolen credit card. I had survived poverty. I had built a corporate empire. I had faced the ultimate betrayal from my own flesh and blood, and I had walked through the fire without losing my integrity. I took one final sip of my coffee, watching the morning sun rise over the quiet rooftops of my working-class neighborhood. I was a man who required absolutely nothing from anyone else. The air was clean, the property was mine, and the silence was perfectly golden. I closed my eyes and breathed in the fresh morning air, enjoying the profound, absolute peace of a man who knows exactly what he is worth. If there is one thing this entire ordeal has taught me, it is that shared blood does not automatically grant someone a free pass to your life or your hard-earned resources. True wealth is never measured by the balances in your bank accounts or the designer labels hanging in your closet. It is measured by the quiet dignity of an honest day's work and the absolute peace that comes from setting uncompromising boundaries. We often spend our lives pouring our love and finances into our children, hoping it will make them decent people, but sometimes the most profound act of love you can offer is stepping aside and allowing them to hit rock bottom so they can finally learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. If you found value in my journey, please leave a comment below to share your own experiences with setting family boundaries, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience.